Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Urban Update. I'm Byron Barnett. On the show this morning, information on the free screening of an incredible documentary that tells the story of two teenagers who pursue their dreams of becoming professional ballet dancers as a way to escape the violent slums of Rio de Janeiro. We'll have one of the stars of the movie in studio this morning. Also on the program, a school dedicated to helping foreign professionals and their families adapt to their life in Boston. But up first, tomorrow, the Iowa caucuses represent the first time actual voters weigh in on the presidential nomination contest. New Hampshire is a week behind. Like it or not, the results usually are very important in determining the major parties' nominees and who they will be. In recent decades, the two states received about as much media as all other states combined. Now, to discuss and to give us their pregame analysis, we've invited two politically astute guests this morning to give us their perspective on what we can expect tomorrow and in the coming weeks. Joining us this morning are Leverett Wing. He's the executive director of Commonwealth Seminar, which provides legislative training, networking, and opportunities with top policymakers and public service job opportunities for diverse leaders in Massachusetts. Also with us, Richard Taylor, former Massachusetts State Transportation Secretary under the Weld administration and currently Business Law Director for Real Estate at the Sawyer Business School at Suffolk University. Welcome to Urban Update, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Thanks for coming in. Well, we're finally here. The voting is about to start. All the speculation is going to end starting tomorrow. But before we get into that, I guess what surprised you most about this really, unbelievably surprising campaign? I imagine it has something to do with Donald Trump. Leverett, what surprised you most so far?
You're absolutely right. It's the staying power of Donald Trump. When he began the campaign, I thought he would be no more than a bit of a sideshow. But he has this staying power, and he has this magnetism that his voters, his supporters are growing, and his supporters are steadfast. We were talking a little bit off here where he had mentioned where he said he could walk down Fifth Avenue, shoot somebody, and not lose any voters. I actually believe that in terms of his voters. His voters are so strong. He's saying all these ridiculous things, and he has not lost any support. If anything, he's gained support, and I think he's inoculated himself to things that he's been saying.
But I think on the other side too. I mean, the burn is 20,000 recently in Minnesota.
You're talking about Bernie Sanders?
Yes, he seems to be significantly outpacing the expectation with respect to Senator Hillary Clinton. So I think on both sides, they're big surprises.
Well, do these crowds mean anything? They're obviously getting the huge crowds. Do the crowds mean anything?
Well, clearly, voter turnout is questionable and suspect for everyone. Crowds are one thing, ads are another, but you have to see if there's a field organization. And that's part of what we're going to determine in Iowa and in New Hampshire. So I think both are important, and we'll have to see. I do think crowds mean something for candidates that are surprise candidates. I don't think 20,000 people come out and then people don't show up.
Yeah. You mentioned Donald Trump making these outrageous statements. How is it that he can say almost anything and his supporters just don't seem to care?
I think his supporters they're of a different ilk. These supporters are folks. There was a poll, I think it was NBC Wall Street Journal. We're still NBC, correct?
Yes.
All right, that's right. An NBC Wall Street Journal poll showed that a lot of his voters are first-time voters who have never really participated in the political system, and they're angry. They're very angry, and he speaks to what they're feeling, and he's saying things that they feel, but for up until now have been afraid to say. Now,
what's going on in Iowa, obviously the big show there is between Trump and Cruz, Ted Cruz, Senator Ted Cruz. These two are really battling it out. And Ted Cruz, I mean, the pundits seem to think that this is where he's really got to make his stand in Iowa. And again, in Iowa, you tend to have the extremes, very conservative Republicans and very liberal Democrats. So what's your take on the Cruz-Trump battle?
I don't think it's only a Cruz-Trump battle. I think there's going to be a 1-2 there. I think number 3 is equally as important. The Des Moines, Iowa Register endorsed Marco Rubio. And so in addition to the top two, the real question is who's going to be number 3 as you move to New Hampshire and to South Carolina.
The establishment candidate.
That's correct. So the argument is that you use Trump to knock off Cruz, and then you come back and have Rubio knock off Trump. I'm not sure it's going to play that way, but number 3 in Iowa and New Hampshire is very important.
What happened to Jeb Bush? Now, he spent, what, 60, 70
Right.
million dollars, and he can't get out of single digits. What happened there?
Well, I think that you have, predictably, on the Republican side, the establishment candidates are doing poorly. But on the Democratic side, Hillary is also an establishment candidate. Bernie, you would expect to be viewed that way, but he's not. Income equality and all the other things that he's talking about. He's the surprise given his profile and length of time in public eye.
I think that, building off of that, I think that some of the difficulties that the Republicans are having in D.C., the congressional approval rating is at rock bottom. I think it was, last I saw, it was 12%. I think that is playing a role in people not supporting the establishment candidates, because the establishment candidates represent the problems in D.C.
What about, and we talk about Bernie Sanders now, who's been a socialist. Does America care that he was a socialist?
I think that this is what has gotten the talk about Bloomberg possibly entering the race. If Bernie gets the nomination somehow on the Democratic side, I think you'll see Bloomberg in the race. Yeah. But I think in both cases, people seem to think Trump can't pivot in a general election, nor can Bernie pivot in a general election. Remains to be seen. I'm not sure the public is convinced as some of the pundits are.
Now, everyone is saying that Hillary could actually lose Iowa and New Hampshire because she's got the quote-unquote firewall down in South Carolina, meaning that's where you have a larger population of black voters who are more familiar with her than they are with Bernie. Does that, does that theory hold up? Or if Bernie goes rolling through the first 2 states, people are going to take a second look at him?
I think it goes beyond South Carolina. I mean, if you look at all of the polling, there's Super Tuesday, which is March 1st. Then you've got Mini Tuesday, which I think is March 15th. Those states, there are, in Mini Super Tuesday, I think there's Illinois, there's Ohio, there's North Carolina and Florida, and then there are these other states on Super Tuesday, like Texas, Massachusetts included, where she has, based upon the latest polls, huge leads. So I don't think it's incumbent upon South Carolina to stop the momentum of Bernie. I think it's just the lay of the land, and as Richard was saying, the perceived inability of Bernie to pivot. The difference between the Obama campaign and the Sanders campaign is that Obama was more centrist. You just mentioned Bernie is a self-avowed socialist, so there is a major difference there. So I think the centrist nature of the remaining states will make it that much more difficult for Bernie to continue his momentum.
Also, please recall, on Martin Luther King Jr. Day in 2008, candidate Obama was welcomed into Ebenezer Baptist Church. That was the signal.
Right.
When Reverend Dr. Raphael Warnock stood next to him, it was over. It remains to be seen how that plays out in the 11 Confederate states going forward.
Okay. Now, I guess wrapping things up here, I guess, what do you think, what are you going to be looking for tomorrow in the Iowa caucuses, next week in the New Hampshire primary? What things are you going to be looking for? What is going to be significant in your view?
I mean, you alluded to it earlier. It said who comes out as I think the fait accompli is in Iowa, it's Trump. It's Trump and Cruz. Who among the remaining candidates makes that surprisingly strong showing and then becomes the target for Donald Trump to take that person down?
The top establishment candidate.
Exactly.
The question is, who drops out after Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina? And so those bottom tier candidates are desperately fighting for number 3. We know where 1 and 2 is probably going to be. But number 3 and number 4, I would say, that's where it is, because the Republican primaries they've got to narrow the field so they can be a focus.
And this whole thing, they did the autopsy after 2012 when Mitt Romney ran. The Republican Party, I would argue, they don't seem to be growing the party. They're trying to. in a way that they should to expand the number of voters, more inclusive of African Americans, more inclusive of Hispanics and so forth. Why is that?
I think that is the challenge, frankly, for both candidates. I believe the minority vote is going to determine the president perhaps more than ever. At the 11 Confederate states, you have 3.2 million black unregistered, 3.3 million Hispanics that are unregistered in the former 11 Confederate states.
Is there anything that Donald Trump can say that could possibly get a significant amount of Hispanic votes after all of this?
Appreciate, just a few weeks ago in South Carolina, Tim Scott and Ryan had a conference, a Jack Kemp conference, talking about high unemployment.
And just playing off that, does that mean that the Democrats probably going to win? If the Republican doesn't expand, if the Republicans don't expand their base?
Well, if the Republican nominee are either Donald Trump or Ted Cruz, then I think the Democrat wins.
Okay, all right. And we'll leave it right there. The voting starts tomorrow, and the caucusing starts tomorrow, and we'll see what happens. Okay.
Thanks,
Richard Taylor, Leverett Wing, thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having us.
Okay, when we return, teaching foreign professionals and their families how to go about their day-to-day interactions in their new life right here in Boston. Stay with us. We'll be back on Urban Update.